So you have a concrete pool and you want to know more about interior surface options for concrete pools. For some people that might be confusing. What do you mean? You have a concrete pool, the interior surface is concrete, presumably. And in a lot of cases it actually can be. That concrete would actually be called plaster. And the reason why you would have that is because concrete is actually a porous substance. So if you were to build a concrete swimming pool entirely of concrete, well, it probably would leak a lot of water. And the way that you resolve that is after a concrete pool is built, or the shell is formed, so to speak, an interior surface is then added, and the interior surface specifically is something that has enhanced resistance to water permeation. Now, I very specifically didn't say it's waterproof, because in most cases, most concrete swimming pools are not waterproof, and most interior surfaces for concrete swimming pools are not waterproof because they're made of ultimately concrete, or a concrete-like product like a mortar or a pool plaster, which is essentially just a mortar product using very, very fine sand as an aggregate. So when it comes to interior pool surfaces for concrete pools, what you need to know is this, that there's a pool plaster, which is about a 3/4 inch thick layer of dense mortar applied to the entire interior surface of the concrete pool. There's also about 200 different proprietary concrete mixes that have special sounding names that ultimately all they are at the end of the day is some Portland cement and some sand or some aggregate mixed together and then troweled into the pool at about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch in thickness. All of those can be classified as a plaster interior surface. Different than a plaster interior surface might be a pebble interior surface or an exposed aggregate interior surface. That's a very common option in concrete swimming pools, is to have a pebble or exposed aggregate interior surface, and it would be immediately recognizable as looking just like a large amount of exposed rocks. They're very durable and long-lasting, and there's a lot that you could say about that, but ultimately different than a swimming pool plaster. So we've looked at plaster and we've talked about pebble. The only other real option other than tile would be to paint. So tile could be glass, porcelain, ceramic, any number of types of tile for the interior surface. It's the most expensive interior surface option, probably the longest lasting, but ultimately the least of you watching this video will have tile. Tile's just too expensive for most people. You see it a lot in commercial swimming pools, not really as an entire option for the whole interior surface of a residential concrete pool. Usually you'd only see tile around the water line, and the reason you'd see that is because tile is very resistant to staining, and that's why it's put at the water line to prevent any scum lines from forming at the top of the water level in a concrete swimming pool. So what's the final option? Paint. Paint is the final option, and quite a few people watching this video wondering about interior surface options for concrete pools either have a painted pool or thinking about painting the pool themselves. On the surface, painting a pool seems like a cheaper option than plaster or pebble or tile. If you've ever had a quote done for those services to be done to your pool, you've probably been surprised to discover how incredibly expensive they can be. And comparatively speaking, painting a pool is easy, something you could do yourself. Well, there's 3 types of paint for concrete pools, and some of them are easier to use than others. The most common is epoxy paint. If you have a painted concrete swimming pool, chances are probably 7 out of 10 that's epoxy. It's the most common by far. It's the longest lasting, but it's also the hardest to apply. So there's good and bad to be said about that specific interior surface. Slightly less common is chlorinated rubber or synthetic rubber paint. And synthetic rubber and epoxy would be pretty much indistinguishable to the eye. You would actually have to do testing to find out which is the correct solvent to determine an epoxy pool paint from a synthetic rubber pool paint. And that makes it very tough for some pool owners to figure out what to do, because you have to paint a concrete swimming pool with whatever it was painted with before. If you have one kind of paint and you try to paint with a different paint, it's almost certainly not going to work out, with the sole exception of the third type of paint, which is acrylic paint. Acrylic paint or water-based paint. The other paints are all a solvent-based chemical product, whereas this is much more like a house paint. Acrylic paint goes on thin, it doesn't really cover anything, it doesn't really provide much in way of enhancement for water retention. It does change the color, it does make the pool look a lot better, and ultimately that's why I have a tutorial on my website, swimmingpoolsteve.com, about how to paint older concrete swimming pools with this one particular type of paint that is pretty affordable. It goes on pretty easy. It's not super difficult like epoxy paints can be. So in total, it's pretty forgiving to work with. And something that it has that other paints don't have is it doesn't need to be sandblasted to be removed. One day in the future, if you want to change the type of interior surface that your concrete pool has, from plaster to pebble to paint or anything like that, you're going to have to strip away everything that's there already. And if your pool is painted with an epoxy paint or chlorinated rubber paint, that means you're going to have to pay for sandblasting services, and blasting services are quite expensive. So the acrylic paint option for interior surfaces for concrete pools could potentially be a good option to buy you a couple years time, where you paint the pool for now, maybe 3 years or 6 years down the road, you could pressure wash that acrylic paint off. So you don't have to pay for actual blasting services, just pressure wash it away, and then you've exposed the original surface that you can now build off from with a different type of interior surface. If this information was helpful to you, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you can check out my website, swimmingpoolsteve.com.